Joe and Ben had been best friends for as long as anyone could remember. They grew up together, played together, and did almost everything side by side. It was rare to see one without the other. People often wondered what made their bond so special. Was it their shared laughter? Their deep understanding of each other? No one could say for sure, but one thing was clear. Joe and Ben were more than just friends, they were like brothers. From childhood, they had a simple rule: no secrets, no lies, and always sticking together. They knew each other's moods without saying a word. If Joe was upset, Ben could tell just by looking at him. If Ben was happy, Joe would feel the same joy as if it were his own. They didn't need long explanations. A single glance was enough. They spent their days telling stories, cracking jokes, and dreaming about the future. One day, as they sat under their favorite tree watching the sunset, Joe said, "Ben, we will never leave each other, right?" Ben smiled and nodded. "Of course not. We'll grow old together." Then Joe had an idea. "What if we get married on the same day? That way, we will still be together even when we start our own families." Ben laughed. "That's a great idea. Not just that, we should live in the same house too." They shook hands and promised that no matter what happened, they would keep their promise. But life has its own plans. Promises, no matter how sincere, don't always go the way we expect. What challenges will come their way? Will their bond remain as strong as ever? One bright afternoon, Joe and Ben were walking through the village when they met a beautiful young woman named Sandra. She had a warm smile, sparkling eyes, and a cheerful spirit that made it easy to talk to her. The three of them started chatting, laughing, and sharing stories. As the conversation went on, Ben began to notice something. Sandra's attention was mostly on Joe. Every time Joe spoke, she listened with great interest, her eyes shining with admiration. She laughed at his jokes, nodded eagerly at his words, and seemed completely drawn to him. Ben tried to join in, but it was clear that Sandra was more focused on Joe. He felt something he had never felt before, a sharp sting of jealousy. But instead of showing it, he forced a smile and pretended everything was fine. After all, Joe was his best friend. He didn't want to ruin the moment. That evening, as they walked home, Ben remained quiet. Joe, on the other hand, was excited. "Ben, did you see how amazing Sandra is? She's different from any other girl I've met," Joe said with a big smile. Ben nodded slowly. "Yes, she seems nice," he said, forcing a smile. But deep inside, he felt something he couldn't explain. From that day on, Joe and Sandra started seeing each other often. They met in quiet places, under the big mango tree by the river, at the village square in the evening, and sometimes even by the market when Sandra finished helping her mother. Their friendship quickly turned into love. One night, as they sat under the stars, Joe took Sandra's hands in his and looked deep into her eyes. "Sandra, I love you," he said softly. "You have everything I've ever wanted in a woman. I want you to be my wife." Sandra blushed, her heart racing with joy. "Joe, I will marry you anytime, any day," she said happily. "Yes, I will be your wife." Joe couldn't contain his happiness. He lifted her hands and kissed them gently. "You have made me the happiest man in the world," he said. Their love blossomed like flowers in spring. They spent every moment together, talking about their future, making plans, and dreaming of the beautiful life they would have. But while Joe and Sandra were lost in their love, Ben was left alone in the shadows, watching as the bond he once shared with Joe slowly faded. Would their friendship survive this new love? Or was this the beginning of a painful change? Joe and Sandra's love grew stronger each day, and soon they began planning their wedding. Their excitement was like the rising sun, bright, warm, and full of promise. Everywhere they went, they held hands, whispering sweet words to each other. The villagers admired their love, and many wished for a marriage as beautiful as theirs. But while Joe and Sandra were lost in their happiness, Ben was drowning in darkness. He sat with them, pretending to laugh and celebrate, but inside, his heart burned with jealousy and bitterness. He felt abandoned. The friend he once called a brother was now sharing his life with someone else, and it hurt him deeply. The day finally came. It was a grand celebration. Friends and family gathered in colorful outfits, singing, dancing, eating, and drinking in joy. Joe and Sandra stood before everyone, looking into each other's eyes with love and happiness. They had waited for this moment for so long, and now it was real. In the middle of the celebration, Ben approached them with a smile. In his hands was a bottle of fine wine. "My dear friends," he said, handing it over, "I wish you both a happy married life. May your love last forever." Joe was touched. He hugged Ben tightly. "Thank you, my brother. This means so much to me." Sandra smiled as well. "Yes, Ben, thank you. This is so kind of you." Without hesitation, Joe and Sandra opened the bottle and drank from it, laughing and cheering. To them, it was a special gift from a dear friend. Joe felt overjoyed that despite everything, Ben still cared. But Ben knew the terrible truth. The wine was poisoned. That night, after the celebrations ended, Joe and Sandra returned to their home, still laughing, still dreaming about their future. But as soon as they stepped inside, a sharp pain gripped them. Their legs became weak, their vision blurred, and before they could call for help, they collapsed. In minutes, their souls left their bodies. The next morning, the village woke up to shocking news. Joe and Sandra were dead. Their lifeless bodies lay cold on the floor, their happiness stolen in the cruelest way. The whole village was in deep mourning. Tears flowed like rivers as they were laid to rest. How could this happen? People asked. Who could do such a terrible thing? Little did they know, the murderer was the very man who once called Joe his best friend, Ben. The ghostly revenge. After the burial, Ben went home feeling victorious. He relaxed on his chair, smiling to himself. At last, he whispered, "I have won. Now, let me see how they will come and make my heart ache again." But just as he closed his eyes to enjoy his victory, the room grew cold. A heavy silence filled the air. Then, suddenly, Joe's ghost appeared before him. His face was pale, his eyes filled with sorrow and rage. Ben's body froze in fear. "Joe?" he stammered, his voice shaking. Before he could say another word, Joe's ghost raised his hand and struck him. A sharp pain ran through Ben's chest. His heart stopped. His body fell lifeless to the ground. His evil deeds had finally caught up with him. Joe's ghost looked at Ben's lifeless body, then disappeared into the night, satisfied that justice had been served. Moral lessons. 1. Jealousy is a poison that destroys the soul. Ben's envy led him to commit a terrible act, but in the end, it brought his own downfall. 2. True friendship should be built on love, not possession. Ben failed to understand that love does not take away friendship, it only makes it grow. 3. Evil never wins. No matter how smart or careful someone is, the consequences of their actions will always catch up with them. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. More exciting folktales are coming your way, so stay tuned. See you in the next story.